Today, we're reflecting on two very distinct narratives that have critiqued and shaped modern texts. I'm Andrea, and you're watching The Breakdown. So in analysing both Charlie Chaplin's 1936 mostly silent film Modern Times and Patrick Hamilton's 1941 novel Hangover Square, we're going to delve into texts where conflict and crisis have magnified issues contemporaneous to the period, and how composers express concerns and criticisms of capitalism. Starting with the film, Chaplin revitalizes the presence of a silent black and white film, even after the growth of talkies across the globe. Yet his intricate directorial decisions have manifested into one of the most prominent comments on the Great Depression and the challenges facing Western society. On top of that, his humour captured the zeitgeist of the late 1930s, a time of great political and institutional conflict within society. The silent comedy reflects a world space where the sense of individualism is dwindling as people are becoming dehumanized within a modern industrialized world. Chaplin explored the conflict between the industrial powers and the individual as forming a crisis point where identity and humanity is lost to allow for industrial gain, predominantly being capitalist powers. The adverse nature of the mechanized dystopic future highlights how a consumer-driven society is essential in understanding social control and how individual enterprise is overwhelmed by an inexorable bureaucratic industrial machine. The Great Depression that spanned from about 1929 to 1939 saw the most severe economic crisis faced by Western civilization. The film critiques not only the dramatic implications upon the individual, but also the sense of crisis of identity, time and commodification that all came as a byproduct of industrial prosperity. W.H. Auden, one of the most well-known poets of that generation, addressed the crisis, naming it the Age of Anxiety, exploring the conflict between man's journey to find identity within the increasingly industrial and war-prone age. The film's pretentious title, The Story of Industry, of Individual Enterprise, Humanity Crusading in the Pursuit of Happiness, is instantly juxtaposed with an animalistic comparison of the workers to a herd of sheep, presenting a single black sheep caught in the middle. It continues to dissolve into masses of workers moving out of the subway. The high camera shots establish the disproportionate power ratio between the workers in the factory, further highlighting where the economic prosperity begins to stratify society. Chaplin was also able to set the factory as a place devoid of all nature. The frame remains dominated by smokestacks and concrete, reinforcing the presence of the industrial advancements. As Chaplin once said, machinery should benefit mankind. It should not spell tragedy and throw it out of work. Okay, now we'll look at an ideological standpoint. The sense of alienation was first put forth by famed German philosopher and sociologist Karl Marx. He published the Communist Manifesto, introducing his ideology of socialism as a byproduct of the conflicts within a capitalist system. This theory is defined by Frostburg State University in the United States as, in modern industrial production under capitalist conditions, workers will inevitably lose control of their lives by losing control over their work. Workers thus cease to be autonomous beings in any significant sense. Ultimately, Marx expresses how the individual becomes depersonalized and, in a sense, are a human cog within a larger machine of mass production. Chaplin clearly reflects this within The Tramp, as he's constantly tightening bolts within the factory at an absurd rate, yet the product of his work remains unknown as it becomes lost into some greater machine. The whimsical staccato non-diegetic music is Looney Tunes-esque, which reinforces the irony of the crisis the Tramp is in. Modern Times accentuates the effects of Taylorism, being a systematic management theory targeted at efficiency of labour. He highlights the conflict between the institutions and the individuals, resulting in a crisis of identity. Okay, now moving over to Patrick Hamilton's novel, Hangover Square. The novel explores George Harvey Bones' rising cruelty and disdain for Netta, where his pathological desire for her is exploited and manipulated. Hamilton sets the scene in a meandering and slow-burning walkabout throughout the depressing pubs within Earl's Court. This sense of meandering is typically representative of the modernist era and can be seen within Bone, epitomising the unsympathetic, ostensibly harmless drunk, flailing with a fragile sense of reality. Hamilton typifies this with Bone's dead moods, where the anaesthetic aspects of the drink nullify his pain. One has to question if they should sympathise with Bones' internal conflict or just dismiss him as he has all the opportunity, yet remains trapped in the fog and monotony of his days spent drinking. There's clearly a dystopic vision underlying this novel. The composer's modernist vision of London presents the city as a place of fragmented, even alienated lives. Yes, there are a few friendships and even greater alliances here and there, yet for the most part, London seems to separate people emotionally, humanly, and socially. Hamilton's sombre, internal, pessimistic outlook in Hangover Square utilises a sense of ideological inversion, critiquing the greater English society and bourgeois culture within the public space. Similar to Chaplin, Hamilton is able to capture the zeitgeist of the early 1940s London in the state of desolation before World War II. Initially, one must appreciate that Hamilton followed communist ideology within the mid to late 1930s, for his isolated Marxism reflected the dissolute and directionless characters who have had to resort to alcohol to get rid temporarily of capitalism. The novel's characters are uncertain about the coming conflict. Growing tensions are reflected in the narrator's ability to know George's thoughts. Ultimately, as with Bones' dead moods, the characters are subjected to the unavoidability of World War II, forcing them into a cognitive dissonance to deal with the deteriorating world space around them. The pointless vulgarity of war is reflected within the characters. Netta herself becomes superficially attracted to the fetish totems of fascism, and as Hamilton says, she liked the uniforms, the guns, the breeches, the boots, the swastikas, the shirts. The listing of these objects reinforces her attachment and sexualization of the fascist movement. Ultimately, in analysing Bones' schizophrenia as being a pathology, it reflects the surrounding societal conditions, suggesting that his false consciousness was a byproduct of capitalism on the mind. Hamilton transfers Bones' schizophrenia from the ideological subconscious to the world of action, as well as Netta and Peter's passive association with the fascist agenda. Ultimately, he highlights the conflict between the societal conditions and individuals' lives. I'd just like to thank you for watching the breakdown this week, where we analysed Charlie Chaplin's film Modern Times and Patrick Hamilton's novel Hangover Square.